Zara, a former CIA operative known as Phoenix, seeks redemption as a cook aboard the Marigold, finding acceptance and a sense of family with the crew. However, her past resurfaces when the ship is attacked by pirates led by Reyes, who seeks revenge for Zara's involvement in his brother's death. After a fierce battle, Zara defeats Reyes, but her exposed identity makes her a target for her former enemies, including Agent Reed, who orchestrated her downfall. Despite the looming threats, Zara chooses to stay with the Marigold crew, embracing her role as their protector and finding a new purpose in her life. With the help of Jax, the ship's engineer, and the support of Captain Alvarez, Zara prepares to face the challenges ahead, determined to defend her newfound family and forge a new destiny. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. The Marigold, a steel behemoth, cleaved through the South China Sea, leaving a wake on the cerulean expanse. Sunlight shimmered, each wave crowned with frothy lace. On the bridge, Captain Ricardo Alvarez, his face a roadmap of weathered experience, observed the distant horizon. The air, thick as pea soup, clung like a second skin. Bearing confirmed, Captain, Izzy Flores announced, her voice a clear bell. Barely past her youth, a fierce ambition glittered in her gaze, a quality Alvarez recognized from his own beginnings. He recalled his yearning to command such a vessel. Acknowledged, Izzy, he responded, a ghost of a smile softening his stern visage. Maintain vigilance, typically tranquil waters, but complacency is a luxury we cannot afford. Izzy nodded, her focus sharp as she scanned the vast ocean. Understood, Captain. Eyes open. Deep within the ship, Zara labored in the galley. Gleaming steel reflected the sterile glare of fluorescent tubes. A subtle vibration emanated from the engines, a persistent pulse beneath her feet. Her movements were fluid, honed by practice, belying the inner chaos that threatened to consume her. Scents of garlic, ginger, and chilies mingled as she crafted the evening meal, a spicy seafood medley favored by the crew. Her knife danced across the vegetables, yielding precise slices, each a testament to her skill. Dark eyes, usually guarded, flickered with warmth as she sampled the sauce, delicately adjusting the seasoning. Yet even as she cooked, Zara remained acutely aware. She registered the ship's symphony, the hull's groan, distant metallic clangs, muted voices from the deck above. She absorbed details, like a meticulous librarian storing knowledge. Jax Rodriguez, the engineer, always humming a wordless tune. The captain's slight limp, a memento from a long-ago storm. Izzy's brow furrowed in concentration. These were her shipmates now, bound together on this floating world. A fragile protectiveness blossomed, a fierce resolve to safeguard them as she grappled with her inner demons. A battered radio sputtered to life on the counter. With calculated nonchalance, Zara adjusted the volume. Escalating pirate activity in the South China Sea, the announcer intoned. Authorities urge extreme caution and immediate reporting of any suspicious activity. Several freighters have been targeted recently, with pirates exhibiting increasingly sophisticated techniques. Zara's grip tightened on her knife handle. Pirates. Always pirates, it seemed. One menace replacing another. She'd sought sanctuary, anonymity, but fate, it seemed, had other ideas. As the radio droned on, her mind shifted gears. The quiet cook receded, replaced by the woman she tried to bury, Phoenix, the CIA operative, a phantom straddling two worlds. A glance through the porthole revealed a deceptive calm. Beneath the serene facade, danger lurked. She could sense it, a prickling awareness, a subtle shift in the air. Later, as twilight painted the sky in fiery hues, the crew gathered for dinner. The galley resonated with the aroma of Zara's creation and the lively sounds of conversation. Captain Alvarez presided at the head of the table, a pensive expression etched on his face. The pirate advisory weighed heavily on him. He trusted his crew, but understood a cargo vessel was no match against seasoned raiders. "Attention, everyone," he announced, his voice sharp. "Heightened vigilance is required tonight. Reports indicate increased pirate activity in these waters. Report anything out of the ordinary immediately." The crew acknowledged him, their faces sobering at the reminder of brutal attacks and stolen loot. No one desired to become a victim. "Don't fret, Captain," Jax declared, his usual cheerfulness undaunted. "We'll keep a keen eye. They won't catch us unawares." Zara remained silent, observing the faces surrounding her. She detected fear but also resilience. They were a solid team, dedicated and diligent. She would do everything within her power to shield them. After dinner, Zara returned to the galley to clean. The mess hall was deserted, save for the rhythmic slosh of waves against the hull. She scrubbed the surfaces with automatic motions, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. Plan was needed. An assessment of weaknesses was paramount, as was preparation for what felt inevitable. Her reflection in the polished steel of the sink presented a stranger. A woman with haunted depths in her eyes and determination set on her face. A woman who knew too much, had done too much. Could she ever truly be redeemed? Could she ever truly escape her past? Or was she fated to be perpetually haunted by the wraiths of her previous life? Such inquiries were a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Her present concern was protecting her crew. She had to survive, they had to survive. She retrieved a small, time-worn leather pouch from a drawer. Tucked amidst a collection of beads and baubles lay a set of lockpicks, a relic from her former life, a reminder of the skills she desperately attempted to suppress. Her fingers grazed the delicate instruments, a faint smile gracing her lips. Some skills, it appeared, were indelible. Back on the bridge, Izzy surveyed the inky blackness with her binoculars. Starlight and faint moonlight provided the only illumination. The sea appeared unnaturally calm. "Any reports, Izzy?" Captain Alvarez queried, his voice tight. "Negative, Captain," she replied, her tone steady. "All quiet." But even as the words left her lips, a flicker of movement snagged her attention. A shadowed form on the horizon, barely discernible against the dark void. "Stand by," she said, her voice tightening with alarm. "I'm picking up something." A vessel approaching at speed. Alvarez seized his own binoculars, his blood turning to ice. A small, rapid vessel heading straight for them. "Sound the alarm," he bellowed. "All hands on deck. We have company." The ship shuddered as the alarm erupted, a piercing shriek shattering the tranquil night. The crew rushed to their designated posts, etched with fear and determination. Zara emerged from the galley, alertness sharpening her senses. She witnessed the pandemonium on deck, frantic movement, the glimmer of weapons. It was unfolding. The impending storm had arrived. Weaving through the throng, she bumped into Jax. He was pale, yet his jaw was set, indicating he wasn't yielding. "Zara," he said urgently, "get below. It's not safe up here." Zara smiled grimly. "Don't you worry about me, Jax," she countered. "I'm perfectly capable of handling myself." She seized a heavy wrench from a nearby toolbox, testing its weight in her hand. It felt remarkably comfortable, a familiar heft. "Besides," she added, eyes blazing, "I wouldn't miss this spectacle for the world." The pirate vessel closed in, engines screaming, its dark hull slicing through the water with predatory intent. The serenity of the South China Sea was about to be irrevocably broken. Ghosts of Jakarta. Jakarta 3 years gone. The air, viscous with humidity and exhaust, clung like a shroud. Zara, then only Phoenix, adjusted the calm nestled under her dark crop. The alley stank of overripe refuse and frayed hopes. "Eagle One in position," she murmured, her voice a flattened whisper against the city's clamor. "Target visual confirmation requested." A static burst in her ear. "Confirmed, Phoenix." Ramon's inside the tea house. Triumvirate of guards spotted. Tread carefully. That was Miller, her second, or so he pretended. Phoenix signaled her unit. Ramirez, a titan with a passion for controlled explosions. Chan, a chameleon in human form, adept at slipping through shadows, and Davies, the digital Houdini who could unlock any system. Phantoms in the urban labyrinth, their objective. Exfiltrate Rahman, a disgraced Indonesian general peddling state secrets to the highest bidder. The tea house, a poorly lit warren echoing with porcelain and hushed deals, was Rahman's haunt of choice. Phoenix had ingested the blueprints, internalized the escape routes, foreseen every contingency. It was her specialty. Chun, you're on, she breathed. Plant the bugs. Ramirez, prep for breach. Davies, maintain comms. I'm moving in. Chun vanished into the throng, a face lost in a sea of batik shirts and sandals. Minutes later, nearly imperceptible trackers adhered to Rahman's seat and the exits. Ramirez cracked his knuckles, a silent pledge of controlled mayhem. Phoenix entered the tea house, a gust of jasmine and spice washing over her. She navigated the space with the fluid grace of a dancer, senses honed to a razor's edge. Every look, gesture, and murmur was dissected, categorized, and stored. Rahman occupied a secluded table, ringed by his heavy-set protectors. He possessed an undeniable aura of power, his features carved with arrogance and cruelty. He savored his tea, oblivious to the storm about to break. Now, Phoenix exhaled, barely audible. Ramirez pulverized the rear entrance, the concussion echoing like a thunderclap. Bedlam seized the tea house, shrieks intertwined with the shattering of ceramics. The guards snapped to action, brandishing their weapons. Phoenix moved in a blur. A sharp kick crippled the guard nearest Rahman. A blow to the carotid rendered him senseless. She hauled Rahman to his feet. "Move it!" she barked, her voice slicing through the chaos. They carved a path through the tea house, a cyclone of precise violence. Phoenix neutralized 2 more guards with ruthless efficiency, her movements honed by years of relentless training. Ramirez blasted a corridor with his shotgun, scattering anyone foolish enough to impede them. Chun provided suppressing fire from the periphery. Davies kept the comms flowing, channeling intel and coordinating their getaway. Outside, a black SUV idled, engine humming. They shoved Rahman into the back and peeled away, sirens baying in the distance. "Extraction complete," Phoenix reported, her voice a monotone of professionalism. Miller's voice crackled in her ear. "Solid work, Phoenix. Proceed to the rendezvous." Choppers inbound. The rendezvous, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. As they arrived, a knot of apprehension tightened in Phoenix's gut. The warehouse resonated with an unnatural quiet. No sign of a helicopter. "Something feels wrong," she stated, her hand instinctively drifting towards her sidearm. Before a response could form, the warehouse doors slammed shut. Lights blazed to life, illuminating a phalanx of masked, heavily armed figures. "What in hell is this?" Ramirez bellowed, his grip tightening on his shotgun. "Phoenix," Miller's voice, frigid and detached, echoed through the comms. "It's finished. Rahman is irrelevant." Betrayal struck her with the force of a physical assault. She spun, her eyes narrowed, scanning for Miller. He stood at the far end of the warehouse, a self-satisfied smirk twisting his features. "You knew?" she hissed, her voice raw with disbelief. "Of course I did," Miller responded, his voice dripping with contempt. "Rahman was a tool, Phoenix, a means to an end. You've outlived your usefulness." The masked figures unleashed a barrage. Bullets tore through the air, ripping through the warehouse structure. Ramirez crumpled in a maelstrom of gunfire. Chun dissolved into the shadows, a ghost once more. Davies emitted a strangled cry as a bullet found its mark. Phoenix dove for cover, her mind racing. Cornered, betrayed, marked for termination. But she refused to succumb. Not here. She flowed through the darkness like a viper, exploiting every concealment. She returned fire with deadly precision, felling several of the masked assailants. She knew the odds were insurmountable, but survival remained an option. Spotting a ventilation shaft, scarcely large enough to accommodate her, she made a desperate gamble. With a final glance at the unfolding carnage, she vanished into the inky blackness. She wormed through the cramped shaft, the rough metal grating abrading her skin. The air hung thick with dust and the cloying odor of decay. She pressed on until she reached the other end, emerging into a desolate alley. Abandoned, disavowed, branded for death. Her team was gone, her former existence incinerated. Phoenix was no more. Zara was forged in the crucible of betrayal. She discarded her old identity as a snake sloughs off its skin. She purged her digital presence, severed all connections to her history. She became a specter, flitting from city to city, country to country, perpetually watching her back. She secured employment as a cook, a quiet, unassuming occupation that enabled her to fade into obscurity. She cultivated a gentle voice, learned to avert her gaze, to become invisible, until the Marigold, until Alvarez, until the pirates shattered her carefully constructed facade. Now, standing in the galley, honing her knives, the specters of Jakarta resurfaced. They served as a constant reminder of the double-cross, the debacle, the devastation. But they were also a source of fortitude. They fueled her resolve to protect the defenseless, to rectify the injustices of her past. This time she would stand her ground. This time she would confront her demons. This time she would prevail. Crimson tide rising. Salt spray, a stinging benediction from the sea he'd known intimately for decades, lashed at Reyes's face. The serpent's kiss, his piratical command, groaned wearily beneath his boots. A wild wind, scented with brine and the keen edge of imminent conflict, clawed at his darkening, thinning hair. Reyes's good eye, sharp as a kestrel's, swept the horizon. Its counterpart, a pearly scar where treachery had once struck, served as a constant, brutal reminder. He could almost taste the phantom steel. "Anything, Benito?" he grated, his voice roughened by countless barks and sibilant threats. Benito Benny Cruz, his second a ferret-faced man whose smile always hinted at some buried scheme, lowered his telescope. "Nothing but blue, Captain. For now." A syrupy deference coated Benny's words, a quality Reyes both exploited and deeply mistrusted. The man craved the captaincy, of that he was certain. But did he possess the ruthlessness to seize it? Reyes intended to find out. A grunt was all Reyes offered. Patience was a bludgeon, wielded without mercy. He felt it, a primal certainty. Something significant approached. Something lucrative. Hours bled into each other under a merciless sun, turning the serpent's kiss into a floating furnace. His crew, a rabble of cutthroats, runaways, and souls bankrupt of hope, stewed and muttered. Reyes ignored their discontent. He'd cultivated their fear, tended it like a poisonous bloom. It was the only fidelity he truly valued. Then, a shout from the lookout. "Sail, oh!" East by northeast. A jolt of pure animal electricity coursed through Reyes. He snatched the spyglass from Benny with surprising speed. A smudge, barely visible on the water. A merchantman, riding deep in the water. The Marigold. A cruel, slow smile stretched his lips. The Marigold, just as I anticipated. Benny, sensing the shift in Reyes's demeanor, slithered closer. The Marigold, Captain?
Disavowed.
Said to carry a consignment of rare earths enough to set us up for life. Dreams are for landlubbers, Benny, Reyes spat. This is about recompense. What's owed? His grip on the spyglass tightened, bone grinding on bone. The Marigold sailed under the flag of the shipping magnates who had betrayed him years earlier, leaving him to rot after a venture gone sideways. They had built their empire on his suffering. Revenge was a vintage best-savored, and he'd waited patiently for this uncorking. "Prepare for interception," he barked, venom lacing each word. "Full sail. Gunners, to your stations. I want her boarded and ours before nightfall." A frenzy gripped the crew. A cacophony of commands, the shriek of sharpening steel, muttered prayers to forgotten deities. Benny, ever alert for opportunity, saw his chance. He sidled up to Reyes, his voice a low hiss. "Captain, with all due respect, the Marigold is no unarmed tub. Perhaps a more delicate approach." Reyes whirled, his good eye burning. "Delicacy is for merchants, Benny. We are predators. We take. Question my orders." Benny recoiled, swallowing thickly. "Never, Captain. Merely mindful of our men." He plastered on a subservient smile. "Their welfare is my burden," Reyes snarled. "Yours is obedience. Now, tell me, what scheme are you brewing, Benny?" Benny, eager to prove his worth, leaned in, outlining his plan. "The element of surprise, Captain. We approach under a neutral banner, feigning distress. Once alongside, we unleash the storm." Reyes listened, his face a mask. Benny's plan was serviceable, if unimaginative. Still, underestimation was a fatal flaw. "Acceptable," Reyes concluded, "but we add a touch of spice. Once aboard, I want every officer on that vessel dead. No quarter. They will know that Reyes has come to settle accounts." Benny nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "As you command, Captain." A flicker of avarice crossed his face. "And the cargo, Captain? The minerals?" Reyes shrugged. "A pittance. The real prize is the spectacle of their downfall. But yes, seize the minerals. They will seed our future harvests." Benny grinned wider now. "Future harvests, Captain? Such as?" Reyes stared at the Marigold, his features hardening into granite. "Such as forging our own dominion, Benny. A realm built upon terror and spilled blood, where we dictate the terms." Benny's pulse hammered against his ribs. A dominion. The word resonated. He envisioned himself at Reyes's right hand, a potentate of the seas, feared and lauded. But Reyes was aging, his grasp loosening. Perhaps a change at the top was overdue. "A dominion," Benny echoed, his voice thick with false fervor. "A magnificent prospect, Captain. Your loyal lieutenant will stand beside you, every step." Reyes narrowed his eye, sensing the hungry glint. The man was a viper poised to strike. Yet, for the moment, he served a purpose. And Reyes was certain he could keep the viper leashed. "See that you do, Benny," Reyes rumbled. "Disloyalty is an indulgence I deny myself, and those who betray me meet untimely ends." He tapped the hilt of his cutlass, a silent threat. Benny swallowed, his smile wavering for an instant. "Naturally, Captain. My devotion is absolute." Reyes returned his gaze to the Marigold, his heart a cauldron of hatred. The serpent's kiss knifed through the waves, closing the distance. The tide of vengeance was rising, and Reyes intended to drown them all. Benny watched Reyes, his mind a whirl of calculations. Caution was paramount. Reyes was a menace, but a waning one, and a new dominion demanded a new hand at the helm. He touched the dagger concealed beneath his coat, its cold promise a tangible thing. The game was afoot. Boarding party. Captain Ricardo Alvarez scanned the unbroken horizon, a cold fist clenching his insides. Though the sea lay serene, the sky a flawless dome, a seasoned instinct, earned through countless voyages, whispered of impending danger. He gulped the last of his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste failing to quell the disquiet simmering within. "Anything, Captain?" Isabella, his eager first mate, inquired, joining him on the rain-slicked bridge. Morning light caught the polished grommets of her coat. "Just a feeling, Izzy," Alvarez murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Keep sharp. This eerie calm. It unsettles me." Isabella nodded, youthful features etched with worry. "Aye, Captain." Her gaze intensified as she surveyed the expanse, her hand instinctively finding the grip of her saber. Below, in the Marigold's sweltering galley, Zara diced onions with brisk precision, the staccato chop, chop, chop providing a strange rhythm against the oppressive silence of the vessel. The crew's hushed unease hadn't escaped her notice. Their furtive glances spoke volumes. A life lived skirting shadows had honed her senses, and a grim certainty settled in her heart. Her fingers brushed the rough leather of the sheath strapped to her thigh, the familiar weight of her blade offering a meager solace. A piercing shriek tore through the morning stillness. The Marigold lurched violently, sending Zara sprawling. A cacophony of clattering cookware mingled with terrified cries. Through the porthole, she glimpsed the serpent's kiss, her ebony sails bellying as she ground against the Marigold's hull. Iron claws hurtled across the divide, binding the two ships in a deadly embrace. "Pirates!" The cry, raw with terror, echoed through the ship. Zara's reflexes took over. The maelstrom of her thoughts coalesced into a singular, sharp purpose. She kicked a stout iron pot beneath the counter as a makeshift barrier, then snatched her knife, its steel glinting dully in the galley's gloom. She wouldn't be caught unaware. Bedlam reigned on deck. Zara heard the crash of steel, the pirates' coarse bellows, and the frantic shouts of the Marigold's doomed crew. She flattened herself against the wall, straining to discern the pattern of the assault. Above, on the bridge, Captain Alvarez fought with desperate courage, his cutlass a whirling defense against two heavily armed assailants. Isabella, her youthful vigor fueled by grim resolve, stood shoulder to shoulder with him. But they were overwhelmed, outmatched by the pirates, led by a man with eyes like chips of flint, Captain Reyes. Their cutlasses painted the deck crimson. "Yield, Alvarez," Reyes grated, his voice like stones grinding together. "Or watch your crew bleed." Alvarez spat defiance into Reyes's face. "I'll see you rotting in the depths first, you soulless cur." Reyes merely smiled, a predatory baring of teeth that sent a chill deeper than the ocean's heart down Alvarez's spine. He inclined his head, and one of his men seized Isabella, pressing a blade to her delicate throat. "Consider your options, Captain," Reyes purred, his voice laced with menace. Alvarez's resolve fractured. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, his face a mask of bitter defeat. "Damn you to the deepest circle," he snarled. Reyes chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "A wise decision. Benny, secure the bridge." Benny, Reyes's second, a lean scarecrow with a perpetual sneer, barked orders, and a swarm of pirates surged onto the bridge, subduing the remaining defenders. They seized control, effectively commandeering the Marigold. Below decks, the engine room became the next target. A crew of pirates, wielding axes and pistols, descended upon the confined space, catching the engineers off guard. The close confines amplified the brutality, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid reek of oil. Davies, the chief engineer, a man built like an oak, fought with grit, but the pirates' savagery was too much. Within minutes, the engine room fell silent. The pirates emerged, their faces masked in grimy gore, leaving a wake of butchery in their path. Back in the galley, Zara watched the unfolding horror through the porthole, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw pirates herding the Marigold's crew, bound and gagged, toward the forecastle. Captain Alvarez, his features bruised and bloodied, was forced to lead the procession. Isabella was nowhere in sight. The pirates were methodical, ruthlessly efficient. This wasn't a mere act of chance predation. It was a calculated, coldly executed operation. Zara wondered what prize the Marigold held to warrant such a daring assault. She knew she couldn't remain hidden forever. The pirates would eventually scour the ship, and discovery was inevitable. She needed a plan, a way to shift the balance. She refused to stand idly by as these merciless killers seized her ship. Zara inhaled deeply, attempting to corral her runaway thoughts. She had endured worse trials. She had faced down skilled killers, escaped impregnable strongholds, and outwitted some of the world's most dangerous individuals. She was, above all, a survivor, and she wouldn't let these brigands break her spirit. She cautiously peered out of the galley doorway, assessing the situation. A lone pirate, his back turned, stood sentinel near the steps leading to the deck. He appeared young, barely more than a boy, his face still holding traces of lost innocence. He clutched a pistol, his gaze darting nervously. Zara knew this was her moment. She gripped her knife, knuckles bone-white. She had to act with swift decisiveness. Mistakes were not an option. This was her opportunity to outrun her past, to seek some form of atonement, to prove to herself that she was more than just a living weapon. She breathed deep, forcing steel into her core, and stepped from the galley, her blade concealed. The pirate, jolted by her sudden appearance, spun around, his eyes widening in shock. Before he could utter a sound, Zara surged forward, her knife a silver blur in the dim light. The quiet cook's gambit. A metallic bite of fear overlaid the usual warm, yeasty redolence of the galley. Zara, feigning composure as she polished the already gleaming counter, was a focused study in concealed alertness. Something was fundamentally wrong with the Marigold. Its spirit tainted. The comforting hum of a vessel sailing in harmony had been shattered, supplanted by the raucous cadence of pirate footfalls and crude shouts resonating from the deck overhead. Alvarez's capitulation felt too swift. A shadow of premonition? Had he anticipated this assault? The notion needled Zara's suspicions, a familiar prickle harking back to bygone days. Trust was a currency she could ill afford. She operated with ingrained efficiency, each movement precise, every sense amplified. The invaders reveled in boisterousness, but their actions betrayed predictability. A knot of them congregated near the bridge, flaunting their ill-gotten control. Others plundered cabins, avarice overriding any semblance of restraint. She marked each visible sentry, the angle of their weaponry, their weight distribution, distilling a tactical overview within her mind. Zara required intel, specifically the ship's schematics. Ordinarily secured within the captain's quarters, those would surely be under close watch. Blast it. Her gaze gravitated toward the ventilation shaft above the stove. A tight fit, even for her lithe form, it nonetheless linked to the majority of the vessel. A ghost of her Langley past flickered unbidden, and a humorless smile touched her lips. Some skills are never truly lost. Waiting for a momentary abatement of the clamor above, a lapse in the pirate's focus, she leveraged two inverted containers against the wall with surprising agility, constructing a makeshift ladder. Reaching the vent, she pried loose the grate with a muted thud, her muscles protesting the constrained posture. She hauled herself into the gloom, the acrid scent of aged dust stinging her nostrils. The ventilation network formed a cramped labyrinth. Zara navigated with hushed dexterity, her hands and feet finding purchase on the meager supports. The ship's architecture was burned into her memory, a necessary skill from her former life as a facilitator. She wormed through the winding passages, her ears straining for any sound, any hint of pursuit. The captain's cabin lay directly below. She located the vent opening and peered down cautiously. Two pirates stood sentinel, their faces flushed with drink and boasting. One absently cleaned his cutlass, while the other was engrossed in a game of dice against himself, muttering imprecations. Ideal. She required a diversion, and an instrument of leverage. Retreating silently, Zara continued her transit through the vents, aiming for the crew quarters. She recalled a modest, almost forgotten storage niche secreted behind a mound of linens. Alvarez had always been meticulous about stashing supplementary supplies, as a precaution. Reaching the compartment, she gingerly removed the vent panel. Within, nestled amid the spare blankets, resided her quarry, a sheathed knife. Unassuming, A workhorse of a blade with a bone grip, it was nonetheless keen, balanced, and familiar in her grasp. It felt like an extension of her will, a silent vow of recompense. The knife represented only half the equation. She needed a distraction, something clamorous, something unexpected. Her eyes landed upon a haphazard stack of empty metal cookware in a corner. A plan began to take shape. Unrefined, perhaps, but potentially effective. Back in the airshaft, Zara positioned herself directly above the crew berths. Drawing a deep breath, she toppled the pile of pots. They cascaded to the deck with a resounding uproar, the din reverberating through the vessel. She detected shouts of alarm from below, followed by the pounding of frantic footsteps. Now, Zara retraced her route to the vent over the captain's cabin. Both sentries had departed, lured away by the disturbance. She silently slipped off the vent cover and descended into the room, landing in a crouch behind the desk. The schematics were precisely where she anticipated, rolled tight and secured with a rawhide thong. She unfurled them, her eyes sweeping the intricate tracery of lines and symbols. The vessel's architecture unfolded before her, exposing concealed corridors, reinforced dividers, and, crucially, the location of the armory. The armory, the linchpin. If she could secure the weaponry, she could equip the crew and shift the advantage. But it would be heavily defended. She required a strategy, a meticulously executed series of actions that would curtail losses and maximize her odds of success. Her mind whirred, assessing probabilities, evaluating hazards. This was an unsanctioned undertaking, devoid of reinforcements, without support. Just her, a blade, and a vessel crawling with freebooters. Yet she wasn't truly alone. Jax and the others, they were worthy individuals, worth fighting beside. "All right, Reyes," she murmured to herself, her voice a mere breath. "Let's ascertain if you're prepared for a cook with teeth." She carefully re-rolled the blueprints and tucked them into the waistband of her trousers. Time to act. Time to reclaim the Marigold. She approached the portal, carefully rotated the knob, and inhaled deeply. She would no longer be underestimated. She would not be made victim. She was Phoenix, and she was poised to rise renewed. Sabotage in the shadows. The ventilation shaft offered a meager berth, cold metal pressing against Zara's skin as she wormed her way forward, the stolen schematics snug against her breast. The air was stagnant, laced with a harsh metallic tang. She ignored the discomfort, her mind fixed on her objective. Reyes's iron grip on the Marigold depended on his lines of communication, the ability to summon aid, disseminate commands, and project an aura of invincibility. To sever that tether would unravel his carefully crafted dominion. At the access panel near the radio room, Zara moved with swift precision. Hard-won experience had honed her into a spectral presence within the ship's arteries. She unscrewed the plate, revealing a rat's nest of wires and circuits. A faint tang of ozone hung in the air. Perfect. The correct juncture. Instead of a crude severing of the primary power cable, a blatant act readily traceable, Zara chose finesse. From a concealed cache, a kit painstakingly assembled from salvaged components and bespoke tools, she delicately rerouted key wires, orchestrating a series of intermittent short circuits. Subtle disruptions at first, almost subliminal, destined to burgeon into debilitating unreliability, rendering communication a frustrating gamble. The murmur of voices snaked through the vent, guttural, accented voices spitting out rapid Spanish. Pirates, frantically trying to connect, their tones spiked with desperation. Zara flattened herself against the metal, eavesdropping. No contesta repeating, "Captain Reyes will be furious." Clipped, apprehensive words. A sliver of a smile ghosted across Zara's lips, a cold, predatory curve. Reyes's machinations were already beginning to fray. Her task complete, she resecured the panel with practiced ease, leaving no trace of intrusion. Then, the slow, muscle-burning return crawl, her senses heightened, alert for any sign of pursuit. Back in the galley, Zara reassumed her role as the quiet cook. She was dicing vegetables for supper, the rhythmic percussion of the knife a grounding counterpoint to the rising tension she could taste in the air. Jax entered, his brow furrowed. "Something's up," he murmured. "The pirates are like hornets in a jar." Heard them screaming about comms being down. Zara kept her focus on the chopping board, her expression a mask. "Communication down?" she echoed, feigning innocence. "Yeah, can't get through to anyone. They're blaming the equipment, but—" His gaze lingered on her, questioning. Zara met his eyes, a spark of understanding flaring between them. "Sometimes, things just break," she offered softly, scarcely above a breath. Jax nodded slowly, suspicion warring with burgeoning respect in his gaze. He didn't pry, but she knew he suspected her hand. And she knew, with a growing sense of surety, that she could trust him. A fragile tendril of trust, dormant for so long, was beginning to unfurl. On the bridge, Reyes seethed, pacing like a caged predator, his hands clasped behind him, his eyes dark pools of fury. "What do you mean, no contact?" he bellowed at the radio operator, a gaunt man with a tick in his cheek. "The signal is fractured, Captain," the operator stammered, his fingers dancing across the console. "Interference, static. It's like a deliberate jamming signal." Reyes's fist slammed onto the console, the metal groaning under the impact. Deliberate? Who the devil? He rounded on Vargas, his first mate, a mountain of a man, his face a roadmap of scars. "Vargas, find the source. I want answers now." Vargas nodded sharply and lumbered out, his eyes glinting, his hand resting on the pommel of his cutlass. The air thrummed with menace. Reyes stared out at the endless ocean, his mind a storm of calculations. He had conceived this venture with meticulous precision, anticipating every snag. But this was a deviation. Someone was working against him, chipping away at his authority, and he would crush them. Back in the galley, Zara continued chopping, her movements fluid and economical. She could feel the weight of Reyes's scrutiny, even from afar. She knew he was hunting, sniffing for the source of the disruption. But she was a wraith, a shade, moving unnoticed through the ship's veins. Supper was served, a drab, uninspired stew that failed to lift the crew's spirits. The pirates ate in sullen silence, their faces tight, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Zara moved among them, replenishing bowls, clearing debris, her eyes constantly assessing, cataloging. As the night deepened, the communication breakdown intensified. The pirates grew more agitated, their voices rising in a crescendo of frustration. Reyes's control frayed, his temper igniting at the slightest spark. Zara observed, a silent player in the unfolding drama, a catalyst, a weaver of chaos, disrupting the delicate power dynamic on the Marigold. And she was only warming up. The knife lashed to her thigh felt comforting, a familiar weight, a promise of safety, a memento of her past, a tool for her future, a tool that had once betrayed her, but this time, she would wield it. Later, as the ship slipped into a fragile quiet, Zara crept back into the ventilation shaft. One final task before dawn. She needed to douse the ship's external floodlights. Reyes leaned on them to dominate the deck at night, to spotlight threats, to keep the crew cowed. Stripped of that advantage, darkness would become her ally, a cloak of invisibility, letting her move unseen, to strike without warning. The crawl was even more arduous this time, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning. But she pressed on, fueled by unshakable resolve. She was no longer just a cook, a refugee cowering from her past. She was Phoenix, the ghost, the shadow, the weapon. She was the one who would drag Reyes down. At the access panel near the floodlight control box, she set to work, her movements swift and soundless. This time, a more brutal method, severing the main power cable with heavy-duty cutters. The lights shuddered and died, plunging the deck into absolute darkness. A collective gasp rippled through the watch. Reyes roared from the bridge, demanding explanation. But Zara had already vanished, melting back into the shadows, leaving behind only silence and a creeping sense of dread that was swallowing the ship whole. The Marigold was no longer Reyes's kingdom. It was a battleground, and Zara was ready for war. Engineers' Alliance. The engine room hammered with a frenzied, mechanical heartbeat that resonated deep within Zara. Steam hissed like angry serpents, metal clanged in protest, and the colossal engines resonated with a guttural murmur, all competing for dominance in the cramped space. A sheen of perspiration coated Zara as she descended the ladder of iron rungs, the air thick with the acrid tang of lubricants and scorching metal. It was a far cry from the placid atmosphere of the galley, a sanctuary removed from the ominous mood brewing above. Jax, a sinewy figure etched with grease and perpetually sporting a startled gaze, grappled with an uncooperative valve, his brow furrowed in a deep ravine of concentration. A dark tendril of hair fell across his forehead as he strained. Lost in his task, he remained oblivious to Zara's presence until she loomed directly beside him. "Need assistance?" she inquired, her words almost swallowed by the roaring machinery. Jax recoiled, jolted, nearly fumbling the wrench. "Caramba! You nearly stopped my heart. What brings you down here, cookie?" Zara offered a fleeting, almost apologetic smile. "Zara. Curiosity, mostly. I've always been captivated by mechanics." She swept her hand to encompass the engine room, taking in the intricate dance of pipes, dials, and levers. It's breathtaking. He scrubbed his hands clean on a tattered rag, his initial shock fading into a cautious curiosity. Breathtaking and a constant headache. This old beast has seen better days. Truth be told, some days I feel like I'm holding her together with spit and hope. Zara edged closer, simulating interest as she scrutinized the problematic valve. "The threads appear to be stripped. You'll require a replacement." "Tell me something new," Jack sighed, raking his hand through his hair, leaving a dark smear in its wake. "Reyes isn't exactly generous when it comes to upkeep. Says we'll hobble along until we reach port." "And afterwards?" Zara questioned, her tone deceptively light. "Another casualty." Jax's brow tightened, his eyes becoming shrewd. "What exactly are you implying?" Zara paused, her gaze circumnavigating the engine room, confirming their isolation. "I've been observing. I'm aware of Reyes's plans. This transcends a mere cargo run gone awry." He retreated a step, a tremor of unease flickering in his gaze. "You're talking nonsense." "Am I?" Zara retorted, her voice calm and unwavering. "I observed you flinch when Reyes mentioned the cargo they intend to unload. I've witnessed the crew's furtive glances, the fear and revulsion etched on their faces." She locked gazes with him, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding that surprised even her. "This vessel is intended for some unspeakable purpose, isn't it?" Jax remained mute, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. He knew Zara's words held truth, but voicing them felt like a betrayal, a plunge into perilous waters. He had rationalized his actions as simply doing a job, seeing himself merely as an engineer, but the burden on his conscience grew heavier with each passing hour. Sensing his inner turmoil, Zara continued her pursuit. "I am familiar with this ship, Jax. I know its vulnerabilities. I am aware of how to ensure it never arrives at its destination." "You're insane," he murmured, shaking his head. "You can't accomplish anything. Reyes would execute you. He'll slaughter countless more if we fail to thwart him," Zara responded, her voice resolute. "I've already crippled the communication systems and the floodlights. That's just the opening move." Jax gaped at her, his eyes filled with bewildered astonishment. "You were the one? But why?" "Because someone must act," Zara stated succinctly. "And I appear to be the only one willing." He faltered, his mind reeling. He had sensed something amiss about Zara, but he had never imagined her capacity for such audacity. He had always considered himself a decent man, yet he had allowed himself to become complicit in Reyes's machinations, blinded by apprehension and a craving for self-preservation. What do you propose I do?" he eventually stammered, his voice barely audible. A spark of hope flared in Zara's eyes. "I require your assistance. I need you to incapacitate the engines." Jax's eyes widened further. "Incapacitate the engines? That's unfeasible. And even if it weren't, Reyes would know immediately it was me." "Not if we execute it strategically," Zara countered. "There exist methods to sabotage the engines without causing irreparable damage, methods that will mimic mechanical malfunctions. And I know how to conceal our involvement." She unfolded her scheme, meticulously outlining the specific components they needed to target and the techniques they would employ to disable them. Her voice resonated with a quiet conviction that belied the immense danger they faced. Her words painting a vision of a future where the Marigold was no longer a weapon wielded by Reyes. Jax listened intently, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to a grudging respect. He had never encountered anyone quite like Zara, someone with the courage to risk everything to uphold righteousness. He understood that aiding her was a gamble, one that could cost him his life, but he couldn't escape the conviction that it was the only choice he could bear. "Very well," he conceded at last, his voice steady. "I will assist you." A surge of relief washed over Zara. She understood that enlisting Jax's cooperation was paramount to the success of her endeavor. His intimate knowledge of the ship's inner workings was invaluable, and his willingness to defy Reyes spoke volumes about his true character. "Excellent," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then let us begin." Together, they embarked on implementing Zara's plan, moving with a practiced efficiency that belied their unlikely alliance. Guided by Zara's instructions, Jax expertly manipulated the engine's critical components, loosening fasteners, misaligning gears, and subtly compromising essential systems. Meanwhile, Zara maintained vigilance, ensuring they remained undetected and meticulously covering their tracks. The engine room, already a sweltering crucible, seemed to intensify as they toiled, their bodies glistening with sweat and their nerves strung tight. Every groan of the vessel, every shout from the deck above, sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. Yet they persevered, propelled by a shared sense of purpose. As they collaborated, a sense of camaraderie began to blossom between them, a bond forged in the furnace of shared peril and mutual esteem. Zara discovered herself placing more trust in Jax than she had in anyone for years. His quiet competence and unwavering fidelity, a welcome contrast to the perfidy and deceit that had haunted her past. Finally, after what seemed like an age, they completed their task. The engines continued to run, but their performance was noticeably weakened, their power output considerably diminished. The Marigold was hobbled, its voyage effectively stalled. "Do you believe it will hold?" Zara inquired, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. Jax nodded, a weary smile gracing his face. "Long enough to provide us an advantage." They exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. They had taken the initial step, but the battle was far from won. Reyes would inevitably unearth their sabotage, and when he did, he would be merciless in his pursuit of those responsible. But for the present, they had bought themselves some respite, a moment to retaliate, an opportunity to effect change. And as Zara gazed at Jax, she knew that she was no longer alone. She had secured an ally, a comrade in this desperate struggle for survival. And together they might just have a fighting chance. Engine trouble. The engine room air, usually a bomb of ozone tang and warm lubricant for Jax, now grated on his nerves, a tangible manifestation of his unease. Beside him, Zara moved with a serene purpose that both anchored and unsettled him. The wrench in his hand, a chunk of cold iron, offered a small measure of stability against the escalating pandemonium. "Ready?" she breathed, her voice a fragile thread against the failing engine's throaty complaints. Jax gulped, dipping his head. "Lead the way." Zara indicated a nest of interconnected pipes, their brass surfaces gleaming faintly under the stark emergency lights. "We need to interrupt the coolant circulation. Disconnect it here." She tapped a point with a hardened fingertip, "and divert it through this bypass." From beneath her apron, she produced a thick rubber hose and a pair of burly clamps. "This will force a temporary stall, but it must appear accidental." Jax's movements were swift, honed by years of practice as he loosened the bolts on the designated pipe. A sharp, acrid odor filled the air as coolant escaped. He then wrestled with the bypass valve, finally securing the rubber hosing with the clamps. Zara observed, her brow furrowed in silent instruction. "Next, we subtly destabilize the fuel injectors. Make them inconsistent," she directed. He understood. Inconsistent meant chaos. It meant jeopardy. Working in concert, they gingerly tweaked the injectors, loosening connections just enough to introduce variations in fuel delivery. It was a delicate dance, requiring finesse to avoid outright breakage. Each minute adjustment was a calculated risk, edging them closer to total engine failure and closer to reclaiming the ship from Reyes's grasp. Up on deck, their tampering began to manifest. The Marigold lurched violently. The steady pulse of the engines devolved into an erratic, sputtering roar. The swagger drained from the pirates as a flicker of raw fear crossed their faces. "What infernal contraption is breaking down there?" Reyes roared, his voice booming across the deck, hand already gripping his cutlass hilt as he advanced towards the engine room hatch. Below, Zara's muscles coiled. "He's coming." "Almost finished," Jax grunted, securing the last fuel injector fitting. He swiped sweat from his forehead, his heart hammering. "Conviction is key," Zara reminded him, her gaze sweeping the engine room. Snatching the wrench from Jax's belt, she delivered a sharp blow to a nearby control panel, shattering the gauge covers. A shower of sparks momentarily illuminated her face with stark intensity. The scent of scorched plastic permeated the air. Reyes threw open the hatch, his eyes blazing. "Report." Jax adopted a mask of bewildered concern. "Captain, we've got a serious problem. The engines, they're failing. I can't pinpoint the cause, but I'm doing everything I can." He gesticulated wildly at the ruined panel. "Something overloaded, tripped the breakers. I suspect a faulty regulator." Reyes regarded him, his gaze piercing and suspicious. His eyes flicked to Zara, who stood placidly by a workbench, wiping her hands on her apron. "And you, cook? What's your purpose down here?" Zara met his scrutiny without flinching. "Just retrieving some oil. The galley supplies are low." She brandished a grimy can for effect. "Didn't want to impose on anyone." Reyes's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. He stalked around the engine room, his boots clanging against the metal deck. He surveyed the damaged control panel, his expression darkening further. "Sabotage," he uttered, his voice a low growl. "Someone is deliberately trying to cripple this ship." Jax feigned disbelief. "Sabotage? Captain, that's preposterous. Who would ever do such a thing?" Reyes ignored him, his focus laser-locked on Zara. You were CIA, weren't you?" Zara betrayed nothing. "I'm a cook, Captain. Only a cook." Reyes seized her arm, his grip tightening like a vice. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know you're kind. You think I'm some gullible fool?" Jax moved between them, shielding Zara. "Captain, release her. She's done nothing wrong." Reyes shoved Jax aside, sending him reeling into a nearby pipe. "Stay out of it, engineer. This is between us." He increased the pressure on Zara's arm, his gaze burning into her. "Tell me the truth. Who is your handler?" Zara's silence was absolute, her face a study in defiance. Reyes's grip tightened further, his nails digging into her flesh. "Answer me." Abruptly, the Marigold pitched violently, throwing Reyes off balance. A shattering clang reverberated through the space as a section of overhead piping ruptured, unleashing a deluge of scalding steam. Reyes bellowed in agony and rage, releasing Zara and stumbling backward. Jax reacted instantly, grabbing a fire extinguisher and saturating Reyes with a blinding cloud of foam. "Get out of here!" Jax shouted to Zara, his voice raw with urgency. "I'll deal with him." Zara hesitated, then nodded, retreating through the hatch and into the depths of the ship. Jax confronted Reyes, the fire extinguisher held aloft like a weapon. "You think you can thwart me?" Reyes spat, wiping foam from his vision. "You are nothing more than a pawn, engineer. You've chosen the wrong side." "Perhaps," Jax replied, his voice quivering slightly. "But I won't allow you to hurt her." He surged forward, unleashing another torrent of foam. The two men wrestled in the cramped confines, the engine room a panorama of disarray and devastation. Above, the Marigold groaned and swayed, her engines battling against the imposed strain. Zara slipped back into the galley, her pulse racing. She leaned against the cool counter, struggling to regain her composure. Reyes knew, or at least sensed, her true identity. The parameters had shifted. She examined her hands, still trembling imperceptibly. They were the hands of a cook, yes, but also those of a seasoned operative. A life she had attempted to bury, to outrun the shadows and deception. But the past was relentless. She understood now that she could no longer remain hidden. She had to engage, not merely for her own survival but for Jack's, for the crew, for the very soul of the Marigold. Her hand found a knife, its familiar heft a source of grim reassurance. The engine trouble was merely the opening salvo. The real tempest was yet to break. Accusations and threats. The engine room's steam-wrought aftermath clung to the air, a stifling blanket reflecting the Marigold's taut atmosphere. Reyes, face a thundercloud, addressed his crew on the bridge. Wrenched from sleep, work, any pretense of normalcy, they stood ranked like condemned souls. "Someone," he bellowed, the ship's comms amplifying his wrath, "fancies games with my vessel, my hard-won prize." From the galley's shadowed threshold, Zara watched, guilt a cold fist clenching in her core. The sabotage had succeeded, perhaps too spectacularly. She hadn't foreseen such an incandescent response. Reyes's gaze, a predator's survey, scoured each face. Fear, resentment, a glint of defiance, all registered. The engine's failure wasn't chance. This was a deliberate act. A wave of disquiet rippled through the assembled sailors. They shuffled, eyes darting away. Even the seasoned pirates seemed uneasy. Reyes's fury was legendary, a tempest capable of swallowing ships whole. Captain Alvarez, bearing the marks of his capture, stood defiant near the front. Despite his captivity, he projected authority. "Reyes," he stated, voice gravelly but firm, "whatever transpired in the engine room, my crew is innocent. They're mariners, not wreckers." Reyes curled his lip. "Sentiment wasted, Alvarez. Your loyalty is moot." He advanced, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Perhaps a demonstration is needed. A little encouragement to unlock memories." Benny, Reyes's lieutenant, stepped forward, brandishing a coiled whip. Its oiled leather shimmered menacingly in the low light. A collective intake of breath swept the deck. "Start with the engine room detail," Reyes ordered, gesturing towards the huddled engineers, their faces bleached of color. "One of you knows. Reveal it and the rest are spared." Silence descended. Only the groaning of the hull and gulls' far cries punctuated the stillness. Reyes's control frayed. He signaled Benny, and the whip cracked its report like a pistol shot. A young engineer, scarcely a man, recoiled. "I know nothing, Captain," he stammered, voice trembling like aspen leaves. "I swear it." Reyes loomed over him, face inches from his. "Oaths are cheap. Lies fester worse than sewage." Unburden yourself or rue the day you drew breath. Alvarez intervened, placing himself between Reyes and the terrified youth. Reyes, enough. This is futile. You're terrorizing innocents. Innocent. Reyes's laugh was a rasping sound. There are no innocents on the waves, Alvarez. Only the hunters and the hunted. And you and yours are now the game. He shoved Alvarez aside, sending him staggering. Benny, proceed. Benny raised the whip, eyes flickering between Reyes and the petrified engineer. Zara's hand instinctively sought the knife hidden beneath her apron. She needed to act, but how? A direct challenge to Reyes would be suicidal and endanger everyone further. She required a diversion, time to strategize. Wait! A voice cut through the tension. Marco, a junior pirate, stood pale and sweating. I saw something. Every eye swung towards him. Reyes silenced Benny with a flick of his wrist. Speak, Marco, and be certain of your words.
Marco swallowed audibly.
I was topside last night, having a smoke. I saw someone near the engine room hatch. It was the cook. He pointed a wavering finger at Zara. A murmur swept through the ranks. Zara felt her blood turn to ice. Marco had spotted her. She had underestimated the risk. Reyes's gaze pinned Zara, suspicion narrowing his eyes. The cook? Is this true? Zara emerged from the shadows, her face a blank slate. I was taking a stroll, Captain. Insomnia. A stroll near the engine room at that hour? How very convenient. Reyes smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. Tell me, cook, your knowledge of engines extends to sabotage. None, Captain, Zara replied evenly. My talents lie in the galley. Liar. Reyes spat the word, venomous. The pretense is done. I know who you are. Cook. It ends now. He paused, letting the accusation sink in. You're Phoenix, aren't you? The CIA's ghost. The air thickened. The crew gasped, their eyes wide with incredulity. Zara remained impassive. The call sign, resurrected from the past, burned like acid on her skin. I sense something different about you, Reyes elaborated, triumph coloring his voice. I couldn't place it, but it clarifies everything. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent a chill down Zara's spine. You imagined you could vanish, Phoenix? That you could outrun your past? You were mistaken. He closed the distance, his eyes drilling into hers. You will atone for what you did to my brother. You will suffer beyond measure. Zara didn't waver. She met his gaze, her own hardening with resolve. Your brother made his choices, Reyes. I merely followed orders. Orders? Reyes's face twisted with hatred. He was my blood. And you stole him. He seized Zara's arm, his grip unyielding. You will pay for this, Phoenix. A price beyond your darkest nightmares. He addressed the crew, his voice laced with threat. Anyone who aids her, anyone who looks at her sideways, shares her fate. Understood. A chorus of fear-filled assents echoed throughout the ship. Reyes tightened his hold on Zara's arm, dragging her towards the brig. Take her below, and ensure she has no delusions of escape. As Zara was hauled away, she glanced at the crew. Fear and despair etched their features. She had to safeguard them, overturn Reyes's dominion. She had to draw upon her skills, her training, her history to deliver them all, even if it required confronting the demons she had desperately tried to suppress. She sought out Captain Alvarez's gaze, discovering within it a curious blend of pity and respect. He offered a nearly invisible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the impending conflict. And Zara, the cook, the assassin, the woman known as Phoenix, was ready for battle. Coming out of the shadows, the air reeked of terror, a miasma more potent than the ocean's saline breath. Zara, lashed to the mainmast, observed Reyes's tyranny unfurl. He stalked before the Marigold's crew, a predator savoring his quarry. At his feet, Captain Alvarez, bruised and bleeding, knelt in utter capitulation. Anyone else eager to test my limits? Reyes's tone, coated with malice, sent splinters down the spine. He brutally nudged Alvarez with his boot, the sound resonating across the timbers. Perhaps a demonstration of good faith is in order. Two of Reyes's brutes hauled a quivering boy forward. The lad, scarcely a man, begged for mercy, tears tracing paths down his grimy cheeks.
Zara's gut clenched.
She had witnessed vile acts before, yet the boy's unadulterated fear, the stark vulnerability in his gaze, eroded the fortress she'd painstakingly constructed around her soul. "Please, Captain, I did nothing wrong. I swear it." Ignoring the boy's entreaties, Reyes unsheathed his cutlass with an ostentatious flourish. The burnished steel caught the afternoon sun, reflecting menace. "Silence. Respect will be carved into you one way or another." Zara strained against her restraints, the coarse fiber sawing into her flesh. The thrum of blood pounded in her ears, the familiar adrenaline surge. She knew Reyes's depravity. She'd seen its aftermath painted in blood and bone. This wasn't merely about dominance. It was about extinguishing their spirits, obliterating any flicker of defiance. Rosie, her face drained of color, stood at the periphery, hands wrung tight. Zara detected the silent entreaty in her expression, a desperate yearning for intervention. Reyes elevated the cutlass. The boy emitted a piercing shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated despair that ripped through the air. Something within Zara fractured. She could no longer remain a detached observer as another innocent perished. She'd spent years in flight, cloaking herself, endeavoring to bury the specter of Phoenix, the lethal instrument she once was. But Phoenix resided within her, ingrained in her very being, and at this instant only Phoenix could prevent this atrocity. Enough! The word, though strained, sliced through the tension with unexpected force. Reyes halted, his blade poised. He pivoted slowly, his dark eyes narrowing as they locked onto Zara. A languid smile unfurled across his features, a smile that promised exquisite suffering. "Well, well," he rumbled, his voice a low growl. "The kitchen drab finds her courage." Bold words from a woman poised on the precipice. The crew stirred, a restless murmuring spreading amongst them. Every eye now focused on Zara, their faces a tapestry of fear, perplexity, and the nascent spark of hope. "You crave retribution?" Zara challenged, her voice gaining strength. "Then come and take it. But leave these innocents out of this. They have no part in your feud." Reyes barked out a harsh laugh, devoid of humor. "Innocent? Aboard my vessel? Innocence is a luxury forfeited at the gangplank. Here you either serve me, or you learn to obey." He indicated Zara. "And you, cook, will learn a particularly agonizing lesson about meddling." "I know your history, Reyes," Zara pressed, disregarding his threat. "I'm familiar with the account of your brother. I know what transpired in Caracas." Reyes's grin evaporated. His countenance darkened, fury blazing in his gaze. "Silence. You speak of things you cannot possibly know." "I know enough," Zara persisted, "to recognize that this masquerade, this mercilessness, isn't about justice. It's about feeding your own twisted hunger for vengeance." She drew a deep breath, bracing herself for the revelation. There was no retreat now. She was emerging from the shadows, exposing herself to the full brunt of Reyes's animosity. "My name is Zara Kaelber," she proclaimed, her voice ringing clear and resonant across the deck. "But you might recall me by another name, Phoenix." A collective intake of breath swept over the crew. The murmuring intensified, rising to a din of shocked whispers. They gaped at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. The quiet cook, the unassuming woman who prepared their meals, was Phoenix, the renowned assassin?
Impossible.
Even Reyes appeared momentarily stunned. His eyes widened imperceptibly, his grip tightening on his cutlass. "Phoenix?" he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It cannot be." Captain Alvarez raised his gaze from the deck, his face a canvas of shock and burgeoning understanding. He'd heard the tales, the hushed accounts of the phantom who moved through the shadows, dispensing death with ruthless precision. He'd never considered the stories real, much less that she was concealed aboard his vessel. Zara met Reyes's eyes, her own unwavering. "It's the truth. I was there, Reyes. I witnessed everything. Your brother made his choices. He understood the risks." "Lies!" Reyes bellowed, his face contorted with rage. "You murdered him. You stole him from me." He lunged at Zara, his cutlass arcing high, ready to descend. But before he could reach her, a figure stepped into the path of his attack. It was Jax. The engineer, his face pale but resolute, stood between Reyes and Zara, his hands clenched into fists. "Enough, Captain," he declared, his voice trembling but firm. "This has spun out of control." Reyes shoved Jax aside, sending him sprawling onto the deck. "Out of my way, you fool. This is none of your concern." "It concerns every one of us," Jax shouted, scrambling back to his feet. He addressed the crew, his eyes pleading. "Are we going to permit this? Are we to stand idly by while he slaughters an innocent woman?" A murmur of assent rippled through the assembly. Some of the pirates lowered their gazes, their faces etched with shame. Others shifted nervously, their hands unconsciously drifting towards their weapons. The seeds of insurrection had been planted. Reyes glared at Jax, his eyes brimming with contempt. "You dare to defy me?" "I dare to do what's right," Jax retorted, his voice gaining strength. "This isn't who we are. We're pirates, not butchers." Reyes laughed, a frigid, callous sound. "You're a fool, Jax, a soft, sentimental fool. You will learn the difference." He shifted his focus back to Zara, his eyes burning with loathing. "But first," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom, "I will deal with her." He raised his cutlass once more, the steel flashing in the waning light. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the relentless rhythm of the waves crashing against the hull. Zara steeled herself, prepared to confront whatever fate awaited her. She had emerged from the shadows, and there was no turning back. The fate of the Marigold, and the lives of all aboard, rested upon her shoulders. Standoff on the bridge. The bridge stank of old sweat and spent gunpowder. Reyes, a dark silhouette against the churning pewter sea visible through the panoramic window, stood with his back to it all, a king in his fetid domain. Beside him, Benito, with his ferret's face and twitching nose, radiated anxiety. Two hulking pirates, brandishing corroded blades, stood guard at the doorway, the air around them thick with a palpable dread. Zara entered, the revelation of her true identity still a tangible weight. Her movements were a study in honed efficiency, a sharp contrast to the pirate's clumsy bulk. The meat cook was gone, replaced by Phoenix, lethal and self-assured. "Mateo," she said, her voice a low, even keel that sliced through the tension. "It ends here." Reyes turned, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Phoenix." An unexpected pleasure, though I concede, the cook charade was almost convincing, pitiful even. His dark eyes, bottomless pools, flickered with something akin to respect before hardening into pure animosity. "Still cloaking yourself in innocence, I see." "I'm not cloaking," Zara countered, her gaze unwavering and direct.
"I'm safeguarding."
"Safeguarding." Reyes spat the word like poison. "From me? From justice for what you did to my kin." "Your kin made his own choices," Zara replied, her voice taking on a hard edge. "He understood the implications. And you delivered the final cut. You stole him from me." Reyes hissed, a pulse throbbing in his temple. His fingers tightened around the elaborate hilt of his cutlass. Prepare to forfeit everything you hold dear. Zara ignored Benito's fidgeting and the pirates tightening their grip on their weapons. Her focus was a laser on Reyes. There's no need for further bloodshed. Release the Marigold. Free these souls. Reyes's laughter was a hollow echo in the confined space, devoid of warmth. And allow you to simply sail off into the sunset, absolved of your sins? Never. He gestured with the cutlass, a menacing invitation. You're not leaving this vessel, Phoenix. Not breathing. Zara remained a picture of tranquility, a stark contrast to Reyes's simmering fury. You don't need to do this, Mateo. This ship, these people, they bear no blame for what transpired between us. All is intertwined, Reyes snarled. All you touch, you taint, as you tainted my brother. He lunged forward, his cutlass rising in a gleaming arc. Prepare to atone. Zara subtly shifted her stance, senses firing on all cylinders. The very air vibrated with pending violence. This would be no simple task. Reyes was animated by years of sorrow and wrath, a perilous combination. But Zara had known worse odds. She had weathered storms far fiercer. Without preamble, she moved, a fleeting wraith too quick for the casual observer. She exploded towards the nearest pirate, her hand a viper's strike, incapacitating him with a precise nerve pinch to the neck. He folded like a discarded rag. She spun, using the falling bulk as a shield, deflecting the second pirate's clumsy swipe. In one seamless move, she divested him of his weapon, the cutlass clattering uselessly on the metal deck. Benito emitted a squeak of terror and scrambled backward, tripping over himself. Reyes roared, a primal sound of untamed rage, and bore down on her. Blades met in a crackling shower of sparks. Reyes, powerful and reckless, attacked with brute force. Zara, nimble and calculating, countered each assault, her movements lean and efficient. She danced around him, using her agility to outmaneuver him, deflecting his attacks while seeking the fracture in his armor. The bridge transformed into a vortex of steel and sweat. The percussive clang of their blades filled the air, punctuated by harsh exhalations. Zara's awareness was narrowed to a pinprick. She registered the dampness slicking her palms, the raw tang of blood on the air, the shallow breaths of the remaining pirates plastered against the bulkheads. Reyes surged forward, driving Zara back towards the helm. He feigned a high strike, then slashed low, attempting to unbalance her. Zara anticipated the deception, sidestepping the blade and retaliating with a sharp kick to his knee. Reyes faltered, his balance momentarily compromised. Zara pounced. She closed the gap, slipping past his guard, her hand a flicker of motion. She struck his wrist, targeting the point where he gripped the cutlass. A precise blow, and Reyes bellowed in agony, his fingers losing their purchase. The cutlass hit the deck with a weighty thud. Zara didn't hesitate. She followed with a spinning heel, connecting squarely with Reyes's chest. He stumbled backward, struggling for breath, his eyes widened by disbelief. Zara stood over him, her chest heaving, her gaze blazing. She had disarmed him. She had prevailed. But the victory had a sour taste. The hatred in Reyes's eyes had not lessened. It had intensified. "It's finished, Mateo," she declared, her voice unwavering. "Yield." Reyes glared at her, his visage contorted with loathing. He spat at her feet. "Never." He lunged, catching her off guard with the sheer intensity of his hatred. He had no blade, but his hands became iron vices. He seized her, his hold constricting, and tried to slam her against the console. Zara fought, twisting and struggling, attempting to break his grip. She managed to squirm free, but not before he landed a glancing blow to her cheek. Pain bloomed behind her eye. She stumbled back, momentarily dazed. Reyes pressed his advantage, attacking once more. This time Zara was prepared. She used his forward momentum against him, stepping aside and using her hip to upset his balance. He crashed into the console, his head impacting it hard. He slid to the floor, momentarily concussed. Zara stood over him, her hands trembling, her breath rasping in her throat. She could end it now. She could complete what she had initiated years ago. She could silence Reyes for eternity. But she recoiled. She took a step back, her hand falling to her side. She could not bring herself to do it. She was not that creature any longer. She had turned away from that life, and she was not retreating. Reyes groaned and clawed his way to his knees, his eyes unfocused. He cast about wildly, seeking a weapon, an avenue to reclaim control. Seeing his chance, Benito, ever the survivor, scurried forward and offered Reyes his discarded cutlass. Before Reyes could seize it, a resonant voice thundered from the doorway. "Hold fast, all of you." Jax, his face grimy and his clothes torn, stood framed in the entrance, flanked by a ragtag group of sailors brandishing improvised weapons. Reyes froze, his hand outstretched towards the cutlass. He looked from Zara to Jax, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Arrest him!" Jax shouted, and the sailors surged forward, overwhelming Reyes and Benito. Zara watched as the mutineers subdued the remaining pirates, their faces a mixture of terror and elation. The Marigold was theirs once more, but the battle was far from won. As the sailors dragged Reyes away, he locked eyes with Zara. A flicker of understanding passed between them. He knew she had spared his life, and he knew that this chapter was far from closed. Amidst the chaos of the rebellion, Reyes managed to wriggle free from his captors. He bolted towards a side passage, vanishing into the ship's maze-like corridors. Zara did not hesitate. She pushed past the celebrating crew and followed him, her heart hammering. She knew she had to curtail him. She knew that while Reyes remained unbound, no one upon the Marigold would be secure. The pursuit was on, and this time it felt profoundly personal. All-out war. Reyes, like a goaded badger, spat across the splintered planks. "Think this is over?" he bellowed, his voice a rasp that nonetheless dripped with venom. Around him, perhaps a dozen diehards remained, a ragged band clinging to the ship's rails, their faces etched with a blend of terror and desperate devotion. Benito, ever the weasel, hovered close, murmuring encouragement. "Just a rabble of cooks and swabs, Captain," Benny wheedled, his gaze skittering toward the hastily constructed barricade Zara had thrown up near the bridge. "We can still seize this tub. A swift, decisive strike. Teach them the price of defying Reyes." Reyes straightened, a spark of cruel amusement flickering in his eyes. Benny's words were insidious, yet he savored their taste. Fear was currency, and he intended to spend it lavishly. "Very well," he growled, unsheathing a vicious cutlass. "Enough skulking. We'll demonstrate the consequences of disobedience. Victory brings riches. Failure, unimaginable torment." A guttural roar erupted from the remaining pirates, fueled by false courage and the lure of spoils. They lurched forward, a tide of desperate bodies crashing against Zara's defenses. Zara, in the meantime, had forged the Marigold's surviving crew into a semblance of a fighting force. Galley knives gleamed with newfound sharpness, mops transformed into makeshift clubs, and even pots and pans served as improvised shields. Jax, ever the improviser, had rigged a system to shower the approaching pirates with scalding water siphoned from the ship's boiler, a non-lethal but brutally effective deterrent. "Remember," Zara's voice sliced through the mounting tension, a beacon of calm. "We fight for our lives, for our ship, for one another. Show them no mercy, but offer them no gratuitous harm. Defend and hold fast." Kenji, usually lost in quiet thought, stood shoulder to shoulder with Izzy, a hefty wrench gripped in his hands. He offered a curt nod. "Understood, Zara-san." Izzy, her eyes alight with a cocktail of trepidation and thrill, bounced on her toes. "Let's show these scurvy dogs what the Marigold can do." The initial impact was savage. Driven by desperation, the pirates hurled themselves at the barricade, their cutlasses striking at anything in range. Zara, a whirlwind of controlled fury, parried blows with a purloined pirate saber, delivering precise disabling strikes with her free hand. Jax's boiling deluge proved devastating, sending pirates howling and reeling, their flesh inflamed and blistered. Yet still they pressed on, their numbers seemingly inexhaustible. Kenji, despite his inexperience, fought with quiet resolve. He swung his wrench with surprising force, connecting with a pirate's jaw and sending him collapsing in a heap. Izzy, in contrast, was a blur of motion. She danced through the fray, her small stature an advantage, tripping one pirate and disarming him before delivering a sharp kick that winded him. Her agility was astonishing, her aim unerring. Captain Alvarez, still trussed and silenced, watched the battle play out with mingled dread and anticipation. He witnessed Zara's prowess, her unyielding spirit, but he also recognized the sheer, unbridled desperation of the attackers. He understood that if they overwhelmed the defense, all would be forfeit. Benny, sensing the pirates' weakening resolve, elbowed his way to the front, a sinister grin spreading across his face. He spotted Izzy, the young girl attempting target. He charged, his cutlass raised in a menacing arc. "Got you now, you little sneak," he hissed. Zara saw him coming and reacted instantly, but she was too distant to intervene. Kenji, however, responded without a moment's hesitation. He hurled his wrench with every ounce of his strength, impacting Benny at the base of his skull. The pirate crumpled to the deck, senseless. Izzy didn't squander the opportunity. She snatched Benny's discarded cutlass and confronted the remaining pirates, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Come on, you sea slugs," she yelled, her voice surprisingly potent. "Is that the best you can muster?" Her audacity, coupled with Zara's skill and Jax's resourcefulness, began to shift the advantage. The pirates, their initial momentum shattered, began to waver. Doubt clouded their judgment. Reyes, witnessing the disintegration of his assault, erupted in fury. He shoved past his dwindling forces, his gaze locked on Zara. "You!" he shrieked, his voice raw with rage. "You will suffer for this. You will suffer for everything." He charged, his cutlass a flashing arc of steel. Zara met his onslaught head-on, their blades colliding in a cascade of sparks. Their duel was a furious dance, a whirlwind of parries and thrusts. Reyes fought with the ferocity of a trapped wolf, his movements erratic and unpredictable. Zara, however, remained composed and focused, her movements refined and efficient. She knew this had to end swiftly. The surviving pirates still posed a threat, and she couldn't allow Reyes to reorganize them. She feigned a strike to the left, then to the right, disorienting Reyes. He overextended, leaving himself vulnerable. Zara seized the opening. She dodged his clumsy attack and brought her saber down in a swift, decisive curve, relieving him of his weapon once again. Reyes stood there, gasping, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was vanquished again. "Finish it," he snarled, his voice a mere whisper. "Do it." Zara stared at him, her expression inscrutable. She possessed the power to end it all right then, right there. But something restrained her. "I'm not an executioner anymore," she declared, her voice soft. "I'm giving you a chance to yield. End this. Now." Reyes laughed, a grating, hollow sound. "Surrender? To you? Never." He lunged again, this time unarmed, attempting to seize her in a grapple. Zara effortlessly evaded his clumsy grasp and delivered a precise kick to his chest, sending him sprawling backward. Before he could regain his footing, Jax appeared, a coil of rope in his hands. He swiftly bound Reyes, securing him tightly. "Sorry, Captain," Jax said, his voice surprisingly resolute. "But this stops here." The remaining pirates, observing their leader's defeat and capture, finally succumbed to despair. They tossed down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The battle had concluded. The Marigold was secure. For the moment, Secrets revealed. The sharp bite of ozone cut through the salty air, a metallic tang against the sea's familiar kiss. Zara navigated the ruin of the firefight, senses heightened, a jolt of adrenaline sharpening her focus. The groans of wounded pirates mixed with the Marigold's engine's steady pulse, a grim dirge accompanying her search. She shoved aside a shattered table, its surface tacky with spilled blood, her pursuit relentless. Most of the crew had yielded, their weapons strewn about like discarded playthings. A surge of molten rage coursed through her, a primal fury threatening to erupt. Years of suppression, meticulously erected defenses, dissolved in an instant. She was no longer Zara, the Marigold's cook. She was Phoenix, the CIA operative, the lethal weapon, the woman betrayed and abandoned. She retaliated with surprising ferocity. Her movements accelerated, refined, her strikes landing with deadly intent. She deflected Reyes's attacks with ease, using his own momentum against him. The knife became a silver flicker in the dim light. Reyes stumbled backward, his face a grotesque mask of agony and disbelief. He had underestimated her, failed to comprehend the extent of her anger. He believed he could break her, use her history as leverage. Instead, he had awakened a dormant beast. "You cannot escape what you once were, Phoenix," he gasped, clutching his wounded arm. "Your past will relentlessly pursue you." "Perhaps," Zara replied, her tone glacial, "but you won't live to witness it." She struck again, plunging the knife deep into Reyes's shoulder. A prolonged, agonizing shriek echoed throughout the confined space as he crumpled to his knees, his grip on the pipe wrench loosening. Zara loomed over him, chest heaving, body trembling. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her drained and vulnerable. She gazed down at Reyes, his face contorted in pain and defeat. She could end it now, severing it all in a flash. Yet, an invisible tether held her back. His death would not resurrect lost lives. It would not erase the treachery nor alleviate her pain. It would only prolong the vicious cycle. Drawing a deep breath, she forced herself to regain composure. A choice lay before her: succumb to the hatred and become the monster they sought to create, or find the strength to rise above it, to forge a new path, to ultimately leave the shadows behind. She withdrew the knife from Reyes's shoulder and stepped back. "It's finished," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "Recall your men." Reyes lifted his gaze, a complex blend of animosity and unwilling respect in his eyes. "You should have extinguished my life," he croaked. "Maybe," Zara said, "but I am not a reflection of you." Turning, she departed, leaving Reyes wounded and broken in the engine room passage. Benny darted after her, eyes wide with terror. As Zara walked back toward the bridge, she recognized that the struggle was far from concluded. She had vanquished Reyes, but she had also unleashed a dormant part of herself, an inner darkness that she must confront. And she knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that Agent Reed and his cabal would not cease their pursuit until she was permanently silenced. The revealed secrets had elevated the stakes, rendering her struggle for survival even more critical. The Marigold was no longer just a haven. It had become a battleground, and she was resolved to defend it, irrespective of the consequences. Vengeance is served. The taste of salt and blood mingled on Zara's tongue. Reyes, a dark silhouette against the storm-bruised sky, spat on the deck, a crimson fleck against the gray. "Phoenix," he growled, the name a venomous curse. "You thought you could hide? The world is smaller than you imagine." Zara ignored the taunt. Her ribs screamed with each breath, a dull, persistent ache that reminded her of Jakarta, of Reed, of the life she desperately tried to bury. The storm-tossed deck offered precarious footing. The Marigold bucked and groaned beneath them, a wounded beast. The wind howled, a mournful dirge that swallowed the sounds of the battle raging elsewhere on the ship. Reyes lunged, a whirlwind of fury and desperation. His cutlass, dulled and scarred, slashed through the air, aimed at her head. Zara ducked, the blade whistling past her ear, close enough to sting. She moved with a speed that belied her earlier clumsy facade, a ghost in the tempest. Gone was the timid cook. In her place stood the honed instrument of destruction she had once been, reflexes honed by years of training and etched into her very bones. Instead of meeting his aggression head-on, she used his momentum against him, sidestepping his attack and grabbing his wrist. The grip was deceptively gentle, but the pressure points she targeted were anything but. Reyes roared, a frustrated bellow as his fingers went numb. He released the cutlass with a clatter, the metal skittering across the deck before disappearing over the railing into the churning sea. He roared again, this time lunging with a fist, a wild haymaker fueled by rage. Zara weaved, the punch missing her by inches. She retaliated with a sharp kick to his knee, the bone grinding with sickening force. Reyes stumbled, a strangled cry escaping his lips. "Jakarta," he gasped, clutching his leg. "Reed, he promised." "Promises mean nothing to men like Reed." Zara spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You were a pawn, Reyes, just like I was." He glared at her, hatred burning in his eyes. "But you escaped. You abandoned us." "Escaped?" Zara's laugh was a hollow, mirthless sound. "I ran. There's a difference. And I abandoned nothing that was worth saving." Reyes, fueled by adrenaline, pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his knee. He was a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. He lunged again, this time going for a grapple. Zara knew she couldn't afford to let him get close. His brute strength was her disadvantage. She met his charge with a spinning back fist, connecting squarely with his jaw. Reyes staggered back, momentarily stunned. Zara pressed her advantage, moving in close, her movements a blur of controlled violence. She delivered a series of precise strikes, a jab to the throat, a knee to the groin, an elbow to the temple. Each blow was calculated, designed to disable, not kill. She wasn't Phoenix anymore, she reminded herself. She wouldn't become her again. Reyes, despite his pain, was not an easy opponent. Years of piracy had hardened him, instilled in him a brutal resilience. He managed to block some of her strikes, absorbing the blows with a grunt. He roared and swiped at her, catching her across the cheek with the back of his hand. The force of the blow sent her staggering, her vision momentarily blurring. He pressed his advantage, grabbing her arm and twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, threatening to dislocate the joint. He forced her to her knees, his grip tightening. "I will enjoy this," he hissed, his breath hot and foul on her ear. "You will pay for what you did in Jakarta. You will pay for betraying us." Zara gritted her teeth, fighting back the pain. She couldn't give in. Not now. Not when she was so close to protecting the people on this ship. She focused on her breathing, channeling the pain, using it to fuel her resolve. She shifted her weight, throwing Reyes off balance. He stumbled, his grip loosening slightly. It was all she needed. With a swift, fluid motion, she used her free hand to grab a loose coil of rope lying on the deck. She looped it around Reyes's neck, pulling it tight. He gasped, clawing at the rope, his eyes widening in panic. Zara pulled harder, cutting off his air supply. His face began to turn purple, his struggles becoming weaker. She held on, her muscles screaming, her lungs burning. She watched as the life drained from his eyes, the hatred slowly fading into nothingness. She knew she should stop, that she was crossing a line. But the memories of Jakarta, the faces of the dead, the betrayal, it all fueled her grip. Finally, with a shuddering breath, she released the rope. Reyes collapsed to the deck, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defeat. Zara stood over him, her chest heaving, her body aching. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just a hollow emptiness. She had won, but at what cost? "It's over, Reyes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all over." She turned away, leaving him gasping on the deck. The storm seemed to be abating, the wind dying down to a gentle breeze. The first rays of dawn peeked through the clouds, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. As Zara walked away, she knew this wasn't the end. Reed was still out there, and he wouldn't let her go. Her past would always haunt her, a shadow lurking just behind her shoulder. But for now, she had a chance to protect the people on this ship. A chance to make amends for the things she had done. A chance, perhaps, at redemption. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't run anymore. She would face whatever came her way head-on. She owed it to herself and to the people who depended on her. The woman the CIA had turned into Phoenix was gone. What remained was the cook, Zara Kalber, and she would start that new life, here on the Marigold. Aftermath and gratitude. Reyes's remaining men, their faces masks of grime and terror, relinquished their cutlasses and pistols. The resulting clamor on the gore-stained deck seemed to coax the storm into submission. The wind, no longer a ferocious roar, subsided into a plaintive whisper. Battered but unbroken, Captain Alvarez was assisted upright by Jax, who offered a tight-lipped grin. "Looks like the tables have turned, Captain," Jax rasped, his voice raw with exhaustion but brimming with relief. Alvarez, still swaying slightly, surveyed the aftermath. Sprawled pirates, depleted crew, and Zara, standing aloof, her expression an enigma etched in the wan light. He gave a slow nod. "Indeed, Jax. Indeed they have." A ragged cheer ripped from the crew's throats, a sound compounded of weariness and triumph. Some embraced, others wept openly, the coiled tension of the preceding hours finally unraveling. The air, thick with the tang of brine and blood, carried a delicate whisper of liberation. Zara drifted through the throng, a silent sentinel. She knelt beside a wounded sailor, examining a vicious laceration on his arm with practiced eyes. Rosie hurried to her, offering a roll of linen bandages. "Let me assist," Rosie offered, her eyes wide with concern. "You've already done so much." Accepting the proffered bandages with a nod, Zara worked alongside Rosie to cleanse and bind the wound. Zara's movements were precise and efficient, Rosie's gentle and reassuring. "You know," Rosie murmured, "I always pegged you as reserved, quiet." A nervous giggle escaped her lips. Turns out, there was a rather compelling reason for that. Zara remained focused on her task, offering no reply. Securing the bandage with a firm knot, she instructed, "Keep it clean. Seek me out later if signs of infection appear." She moved on, leaving Rosie to contemplate Zara's understated competence. The full scope of Zara's capabilities was still sinking in. Jax, in the meantime, was corralling the surviving pirates, his features hardening with a delayed rage. He marched them toward the brig, the heavy steel door of which echoed shut with a resounding clang as he secured them within the cramped confines. Above, the crew initiated the grim task of clearing the wreckage, hauling away splintered debris and attending to the wounded. The camaraderie, frayed by fear and doubt, slowly reknit itself, strengthened by the crucible they had endured together. Captain Alvarez approached Zara, his steps measured. He halted a few feet away, his gaze searching her countenance. "Miss Kalber," he began, his voice a confluence of gratitude and awe. I lack the words to express my thanks. You delivered us from certain doom." Zara met his eyes, a subtle softening in her demeanor. "No thanks are necessary, Captain," she replied quietly. "I simply did what was imperative." "But you surpassed mere necessity," Alvarez countered. You fought with the ferocity of a—" He paused, searching for the appropriate analogy. "Someone accustomed to combat," Zara finished for him, a fleeting smile gracing her lips. Alvarez nodded, comprehension dawning in his eyes. He understood there were depths to Zara he had yet to plumb, but he also respected her privacy. "Regardless," he stated, I am indebted to you, as is every soul aboard this vessel. Once we have tended to the most urgent injuries, I intend to address the crew. Would you stand with me? Zara hesitated a moment before assenting with a nod. Very well. As Alvarez departed, Zara resumed her rounds among the injured, offering solace and aid. She checked on the sailor with the fractured leg, reassuring him of his eventual recovery. She assisted Rosie in treating a burn victim, imparting knowledge on preventing infection. Her actions served as a more eloquent testament than any words. The crew, their initial apprehension replaced by profound respect and appreciation, no longer saw merely a quiet cook, but a brave and resourceful woman who had risked everything to safeguard them. Once the wounded were stabilized and the immediate peril had receded, Captain Alvarez assembled the crew on the main deck. The storm had expended its fury, leaving a sky freshly scoured and a sea that glimmered argent under the nascent moonlight. Standing before them, his voice, though marked by the recent ordeal, rang clear and strong. "My friends," he began, "we have weathered a harrowing trial. We were beset, captured, and confronted with the very maw of death." He paused, his gaze encompassing the faces of his crew. "Yet we prevailed. Our survival is owed to our collective courage, our unwavering resilience, and the extraordinary actions of one woman." Turning towards Zara, who stood at the periphery of the gathering, arms folded, he continued, his voice resonant with emotion. "Ms. Kaelber, you preserved our lives. You fought with valor and skill, never yielding even when hope seemed a distant star. We are all eternally grateful for your bravery and sacrifice." A thunderous wave of applause erupted from the crew, their cheers reverberating across the tranquil water. Some called out her name, others simply expressed their gratitude with forceful clapping. Zara remained composed, her expression inscrutable. She sought neither accolades nor recognition, having acted purely out of necessity. Alvarez pressed on. "I am aware that many of you, myself included, feel a natural curiosity about Ms. Kaelber's history. I am cognizant that she harbors secrets. Yet, I also perceive a fundamental goodness within her, a deep empathy for others. And, in the end, that is all that holds significance." He advanced and extended his hand towards Zara. "Ms. Kaelber," he said, "I would be deeply honored if you would consent to remain as our cook. You are a cherished member of this crew, and we are exceedingly fortunate to have you." Zara glanced at his outstretched hand, then at the expectant faces of the crew, their eyes reflecting hope and acceptance. A flicker of emotion, quickly suppressed, crossed her features. After a brief hesitation, she reached out and clasped his hand. "Thank you, Captain," she responded, her voice barely audible. "I would be honored to remain." The crew erupted in renewed cheers, their voices ringing with elation and relief. They had not only survived a brutal pirate assault, but had also gained a new comrade and ally. As the jubilation continued, Zara discreetly withdrew from the crowd and sought sanctuary in the galley. Leaning against the counter, she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The day's tumultuous events had exacted a heavy toll, leaving her both physically and emotionally drained. Yet, amidst the exhaustion, she detected a burgeoning sense of tranquility. Perhaps, for the first time in many years, she felt a sense of belonging. She had discovered a haven, a makeshift family, aboard this unassuming cargo vessel. She realized her past would forever remain a part of her, that Reed would likely persist in his relentless pursuit. However, she also acknowledged that she was no longer alone in this struggle. She was surrounded by people who cared for her, people who would stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Opening her eyes, her gaze intensified with resolve. She would confront whatever challenges lay ahead. She would zealously protect her newfound family, and she would never again allow her past to dictate her destiny. She was Zara Kaelber, cook of the Marigold, and she was ready to fight for her future. The rhythmic creaking of the ship, the distant hum of voices from the deck, the ever-present scent of salt and seaweed. It was a symphony of normalcy, a comforting cadence that soothed her weary spirit. For this moment, at least, she was secure. For now, she was home. A new horizon. The wail of approaching sirens ripped through the briny air, an unwelcome intrusion on the Marigold's gentle sway. Official ships, bristling with equipment and personnel, bracketed the beleaguered freighter. The authorities had arrived. For most aboard, the ordeal was finished. But a cold dread coiled in Zara's gut. Rescue meant exposure, interrogation, a record, everything she'd painstakingly evaded for 3 long years. She sought refuge in the cramped galley, stainless steel gleaming coldly under a single bulb. With swift, economical motions, she erased every trace of herself, becoming a ghost in the machine. Her few possessions were stowed inside a battered duffel, hidden deep in a shadowed corner. From a waterproof pouch, she retrieved her forged credentials, a fabricated identity, a manufactured history, ready for immediate deployment. Lena Hansen, freelance culinary assistant. Bland, unremarkable, secure. A figure darkened the galley entrance. Jax. He leaned against the doorframe, his customary grin muted, his gaze laced with quiet concern. "They're hauling the pirates off," he murmured. "Reyes didn't look too good." Zara continued wiping the counter, her movements precise and controlled. "As he deserved," she stated flatly. "The captain, he wants to express his gratitude." Jax pressed, unfazed by her cold tone. "He's offering anything you need." Zara paused, finally turning to face him. Her expression gave nothing away. "I need to be left alone," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship. Jax pushed off the frame, taking a step inside. "Is that truly what you desire, Zara?" Considering everything, her real name, spoken so casually, sent a jolt through her. "Lena," she corrected automatically, the word a reflex. "Come on, Zara," Jax urged, ignoring the correction. "We witnessed your actions out there. You saved us, the Marigold, everything." "I did what was necessary to survive," she countered, turning back to her chore. "Self-preservation. That's a lie, and you know it?" Jax snapped, a sharp edge entering his tone. "You could have remained hidden. You could have let us perish. You didn't. You fought. You led. You revealed our capacity." Zara offered no response, her shoulders rigid, back still to him. "Look," Jax continued, his voice softening to a persuasive murmur. "I'm unaware of your origins, or what motivates your running. I do know you're more than just a cook. You belong here." He gestured, encompassing the small galley. "This vessel, this crew, we're a family, Zara. We protect one another. You need us, just as we need you." At last, she turned, her eyes searching his. "You misunderstand the implications," she said, her voice strained. "My past is not something anyone wants to be associated with." "Maybe not," Jax conceded. "But your present, that's something we can cultivate. Captain Alvarez is offering you a permanent role, expanding beyond the culinary." "What? Master strategist?" Zara tossed back, with a hint of biting sarcasm. "Perhaps," Jax grinned. "Or head of security. Or simply, a friend. Someone we can rely on." He drew closer, his voice a near whisper. "Don't flee, Zara. Stay. Give us a chance. Grant yourself a chance." The sirens keened again, closer, more insistent. Time thinned. Zara's gaze swept the galley, pausing on the well-used utensils, stained surfaces, the familiar blend of salt and spices. It stood in stark contrast to the sterile world she had previously inhabited. But it was safe, and, for the first time in far too long, felt like belonging. She envisioned Reyes, his eyes burning with animosity, his accusations ringing in her memory. He had recognized her, revealed her. Her past was no longer an elusive spirit. It was a solid threat, breathing down her neck. Escape was the reasonable course, the only path to sanctuary, to vanish once more, to become Lena Hansen again. Yet, she thought of the crew, Izzy's eager spirit and unshakable resolve, Captain Alvarez's muted dignity and surprising stamina, the grizzled deckhands, their eyes now reflecting newfound respect. They had fought alongside her, entrusted her, embraced her. Then there was Jax, standing before her, his gaze filled with hope, with something akin to affection. She recalled the barren, hollow years spent in perpetual flight, forever glancing behind her. She had traded her essence for anonymity, but at a steep price. She was solitary. Here, aboard the Marigold, she had stumbled upon something she hadn't realized she craved: belonging. A purpose beyond mere survival. A surrogate family. The decision hung, heavy as lead, the burden of her history warring against the allure of a brighter future. She began, her voice cracking with emotion. Abruptly, Izzy burst into the galley, her face bright. "Zara, the captain requests your presence on the bridge. He wants you to..." She faltered, registering the static in the air. "What's amiss?" Jax shifted to the side, giving Zara a knowing glance. "Go," he urged softly. "They anticipate your arrival." Zara lingered a moment longer, gathering courage, then followed Izzy from the galley. On the bridge, Captain Alvarez stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the oncoming Coast Guard vessels. He spun as Zara entered, relief washing over his features. "Zara, my thanks for everything you have done." He indicated a nautical chart spread across the table. "The Coast Guard will escort us to port for repairs and investigation. I require your expertise." He regarded her intently, his expression filled with trust. Zara examined the chart, the familiar markings activating a surge of adrenaline. A comfortable sensation, a feeling of intent, of mastery. She looked to Captain Alvarez, to Izzy, to the crew gathering on deck. They were waiting for her to guide the way. The decision settled. She turned to the captain, her eyes sharp with resolution. "What are your orders, Captain?" The tension dissipated, replaced by a current of shared objective. As Zara leaned over the chart, indicating possible dangers and recommending alternative routes, she met Jax's eyes. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lightened his entire face. Zara returned the smile, a spark of expectation igniting within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could forge a life here, shed her past and become something better, something new. But as the Coast Guard vessels bore down, their lights flashing a warning, she couldn't escape the feeling that her past was far from dormant. Reyes was silenced, but he had opened Pandora's box, revealing her identity to the world. And now, she understood. They were coming. The battle for the Marigold was concluded, but the war was just beginning. The guardian of the Marigold. Oceanic spume kissed Zara's cheeks as the last vestige of land dissolved into the twilight. The Marigold, a sturdy workhorse of the waves, thrummed beneath her, a steady counterpoint to the turmoil in her heart. The die was cast, shadows were behind her. Here, amidst weathered timbers and hard-working hands, she'd make her stand. Captain Alvarez, weariness etched deep into his features, approached. A lingering stiffness marked his gait, a ghost of recent injuries. He extended a calloused palm. "Welcome aboard, Zara. Official this time." Her gaze met his, the specter of her history threatening to drown her. She wrestled it down, focusing on the present, on the faith mirrored in his gaze. Her hand met his, the rough texture a stark contrast to her own. "Thank you, Captain. I won't disappoint you." "Never thought you would," he replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Now, about your duties." He outlined her revised role, ship's cook, charged with feeding the crew and lifting their spirits. But it was understood, an unspoken covenant, that her charge extended beyond the galley's confines. She was a bulwark, their watchman. Later, she found Jax in the comms room, brow knotted as he wrestled with the ship's radio. "Trouble?" she inquired. He started, jolted by her sudden presence. "Just trying to amplify the signal. Protocol demands we report the pirate attack." He paused, manipulating a wire. "Not that anyone will believe us about the Phoenix." His gaze flickered to hers, questioning. Zara leaned against the frame, the vessel's sway a gentle cradle. The Phoenix is dead, Jax. She perished with Reyes. Seeing doubt cloud his face, she added, that chapter is closed. This is my chance at a clean slate. He scrutinized her, then returned to the radio. Well, I'm glad you're staying. You're a phenomenal cook, and well, you're good to have around. A sincere grin blossomed, easing the coiled tension in her shoulders. That night, as the crew congregated for dinner, a simple yet satisfying stew emitting savory warmth from the stove, Zara felt a kinship she hadn't known in years. The air vibrated with mirth and tales, the rhythmic percussion of cutlery against earthenware. Even Alvarez seemed unburdened, his demeanor lighter. Izzy, her eyes sparkling with admiration, settled beside Zara as she dined. This is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this? Zara smiled, a rush of memory. Her mother's kitchen, thick with the fragrance of herbs and spices. My mother was my tutor, she murmured. Cooking is a language of care. Izzy nodded, pensive. I'd love to learn. Will you teach me? Of course, Zara answered. We can start tomorrow. As days bled into weeks, Zara immersed herself in her new life. The rhythm of the galley soothed her, the satisfying slice of vegetables, the oven's cozy heat. She shared her mother's recipes and her own culinary secrets with Izzy, listened to the crew's yarns of hope and despair. She became one of them, a keystone in the Marigold's makeshift family. Yet the shadow of Reyes and the grim realities of her past clung to her. Her actions bore consequences. Enemies lurked, poised to strike. In pre-dawn hours, she honed her skills, sharpened her instincts. A silent sentinel. She was a guardian now, sworn to protect those she had grown to cherish. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, splattering the heavens with vermilion and violet, Zara stood on deck, watching the waves batter the hull. The Marigold pressed onward, a small but stalwart ship carrying a crew united by ordeal and a quiet cook who concealed a dangerous past. She pondered her past, the missions executed, the lives extinguished. The weight of those memories pressed down, but she refused to be defined by them. She was no longer Phoenix. She was Zara, cook, protector, the Marigold's watchful angel. She gazed at the star-dusted sky, a vast and unending canvas. She had uncovered a new purpose, a new family, and she would fight tooth and nail to shield them, to secure their safety, to forge a future where they might find solace. Below deck, in the crew's quarters, Jax pored over a chart, his finger tracing a course. He looked up as Zara entered. I've been thinking, he began, his tone grave. About what happened. About Reyes. I believe he had help. Zara's senses heightened, instincts flaring. What do you mean? He knew too much, Jax asserted. About you, about your history. Somebody fed him that intel. Somebody wants you dead. Zara nodded, her expression hardening. I'm aware. We need to be vigilant, Jax urged. We need to prepare for retaliation. We will be, Zara stated, her voice unwavering. We'll be ready for anything. She touched his shoulder, a small reassurance. Thank you, Jax, for looking out for us. He met her eyes, resolution burning within them. We're a unit, Zara. We have each other's backs. As Zara exited the crew's quarters and returned above, she understood that her newfound peace was delicate, the menace of her past a constant presence. But she was no longer alone. She had a crew, a family, and she would confront whatever trials lay ahead with fortitude and determination. The Marigold plowed forward, bearing its precious cargo and its company of survivors, each transformed by shared tragedy. And Zara, once an assassin, now the ship's cook and guardian, stood watch, poised to defend her nascent life, to embrace her destiny, and to at last find redemption in the heart of the sea. Shedding her old identity, she embraced her new calling, discovering a haven and a reason. The war might rage on, but she was battle-ready.